Hi, everybody. I'm here with an extremely interesting man. I had no idea how interesting he was because when I was introduced to him, we belong to a group called the Melbourne Circle, and I'm always introduced as this amazing violinist, and no one else can get a word in. So here I am with Basil Varghese, who is an incredibly influential person on the topic of basically making this world a better place. Basil, hello, welcome.
Hello. Yes, thank you.
As I mentioned in the intro, our beautiful friends at the Melbourne Circle
Yes.
do make a big fuss of me, and I'm sorry about that. And I read your incredible biography, and I realized that you have done so many incredible things to help make this world a better place. And I'm always interested in people like that. So I just want to thank you, first of all, for being incredibly wonderful. And for the rest of this interview, I want to know how you don't get extremely upset with the way the world is. How do you remain positive? What are the problems in this world, and how can we do something about it? How can we fix these problems?
Well, those are very deep questions in the sense, how does one maintain a sense of optimism in a world that seems to be so fragile and it seems to be so, well, and seems to be experiencing such a lot of pain, particularly, say, the COVID, but also surely in terms of what women go through or what the blacks have gone through in America, these movements, what I call liberation movements. And therefore, we are really in a state of flux in many ways because our paradigms of understanding have shifted so much. And I think this has left a lot of people quite confused. And when they're confused, they get afraid. And when they're afraid, they lash out. So you've got to look at things like how does one maintain a sense of well-being? And that's why I think music plays a very important part, because music is inexpressible, but it expresses what's going on. And I think it can soothe the soul. But having said that, we also need what I call the head, heart, and hand when we engage in life. So it's a question about how do we humanize ourselves in this process? And I've learned that from my own ancestors, but also I've learned that from Aboriginal people. The sense of connectedness, that we are all interconnected. And it's experiencing the connectedness that gives us the joy. And when we experience the disconnect, we experience the pain. And life has its pain because and I sometimes think we're not given enough permission to be sad because we are now gone into a whole industry of depression. I'm not saying there isn't depression. There's obviously depression, but I think sometimes there's an incredible weight put on particularly young people that they're supposed to be happy all the time, or they're supposed to be. And I think that's a bit unfair. I think they've got to experience that life has its sadness,
Mm,
and there are joys as well. It doesn't mean you've got to go on moping around, but
yeah.
it's a very difficult question to answer because what is it that keeps people? Why is it that some people have a great sense of optimism, and why is it that some people tend to become pessimistic or down? I mean, you can have all sorts of theories for that,
Yes.
but
How about your culture? Has that played into it at all? Like, tell us about your early life. And I read that your parents were very influential. I mean, we take a lot from our parents, don't we? So,
indeed, I mean, I think there's no doubt, and I think it's something that you only fully realize when you're an adult what your parents do. I mean, yeah, there's no doubt that my parents. I think the first thing one has to experience, and I'm fortunate there, that I experienced that I was unconditionally loved by them, and I think that makes. I think one of the tragedies in life is when people who have never experienced that. Now, does it mean that's the end of them? No, but I think it's a question of finding that love, and ultimately that love I think comes from this notion of transcendence. I think we human beings can love to a certain point, but not as much as we think we could get from another human being. I don't think another human being can make you happy in that fullest sense of the word. But I think another human being, if you're fortunate enough that you connect and you can share thoughts and ideas and so on.
Let's talk about connectedness, as you mentioned before. You had a big family, eight children, is that correct?
No, we are nine.
Nine children, you're right.
Yeah, we are eight boys and one girl. Yeah.
Amazing. And
Yes.
did you get along always, or was it a big fight a lot of the time?
We have our fights now, but we're trying to get, now we're all adults. So my middle brother's just turned 70. So we tend to meet once a year for a dinner. And we do, we are in a sense, discuss the world. We think we solve the problems of the world. We all have our own ideas about life, about politics, about what interests us and so on.
And when you have disagreements, political ones especially, because I need to ask you this question. When I talk to people about any kind of political problem, it's very, very full of conflict, and there is no resolution. I don't feel that people are happy to exist with each other if they have differing opinions. The opinion is held up as the highest form of anything. It's the most important thing now, to have your own opinion and to be able to express your own opinion regardless of what it does to other people. I remember a time though when you used to be able to talk to people and it wouldn't deteriorate into just a plain black and white conflict. Have you seen a change over the decades?
Absolutely. I think what's happened is that we now have become tribalized in some sense in terms of politics. So there's an assumption that one's politics is the best politics. And an assumption also is that anyone who opposes one's politics is perceived as an enemy. And therefore, you have often an emotion of hatred that emerges. Now, and I think the reason for that is that both sides are losing a sense of the common good. And I think that's the problem. I think in the past, we might idolize the past, but I think I can remember people would sort of disagree, but at the end of the disagreement, they'd get together and have a drink and then ask the question, what's the best really for the nation? I'm talking about now politicians who get together and decide. But now I think we have sort of weaponized it. I mean, like take Trump, or you take, it's sad, right?
Is it the ultimate expression of individual rights as opposed to group rights? Because I know that the West is more inclined towards individual rights outranking the rights of the group. So your culture is quite different. And a lot of the Asian communities are more about the group rather than the individual. So do you feel like this could possibly be an expression of that Western ideal?
Well, I think I would approach it this way. I think that there's no doubt that the Western ideal tends to emphasize on the individual and individual liberty, and therefore that is taken as the par excellence position to be. While in the East, as a generalization, one's liberty is actually perceived in the collective. It's perceived in your group. But I don't particularly like both. I think we can have a combination of both, actually. I am as free as long as I respect the freedom of others. To use that term, I mean, I will defend to death your right to disagree with me. Now, I like that sensibility because it means I don't have a monopoly on the complete story or the truth. And I think, in my experience, people who hold on tenaciously to a particular ideology, whether it's politics or religion or anything, which I would say would tend to become fundamentalists, are basically very afraid people because they don't like to be deep down. They don't like to be exposed to their gaping hole in terms of looking at life, which is understandable. Yeah. So they need a lever. And this is the problem with oppression. We need ways of how the oppressor can actually come out of his or her oppression. It's easy to concentrate on the oppressed. I mean, the oppressed will always have a reason for living.
Is it a mental experiment for you to try and see the reasoning and the rationale behind the oppressor?
No, I think the pain is that the oppressor is also a fellow human being. And the shame of it all is how this particular group have organized themselves to oppress another group. You know, whether it's under the label of sexism or racism or whatever. And that's if you want to say, the tragedy of us as human beings. Now, having said that, we are looking for ways of a way out. How do we come out of this? I think that's your question.
My question was huge. It was, how do we do anything anymore without feeling guilty or without
well, guilt is not a useful emotion.
Agreed, but the people who feel powerless, like me, I feel powerless most of the time, and all I can do is buy organic groceries, and meanwhile whole people are at war. I mean, what else can I do?
I think there are not much else you can do. The very fact that you're conscious of it. I think at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen. All we know is that we can do certain things to make this a better place. I mean, so in the context one is in, one tries to make that as pleasant as possible. But that's easier said than done. But what happens if you're, starving? What happens if you're really being pressed? These are difficult issues. So it depends where you are. I mean, I was taught that basically that all the privileges that one acquires and has is not meant just for oneself, for others. So, and I think you take America at the moment, I think the reason for it is that it's got a rampant individualism. It's got a total disregard for the common good when it comes to things like what we would consider social net, health services, and so on.
Yeah.
The dog-eat-dogs as a society. It's violent in terms of the guns. It is racist in terms it has not yet recovered from the Civil War. It's still fighting that out. And I think hopefully the Biden-Harris administration will take the country to a better place. And also they have this extraordinary sense of exceptionalism. So they just think they're the Ants Pans. They're the most wonderful people on the earth. I mean, that's just absolute stupidity for any human being to think that they are the best or something like that. In terms of them as being the best. Yeah.
It's a nationalism though, isn't it? It's kind of an old-fashioned thing to go about.
But it's very adolescent.
Yeah.
When I was an adolescent, I used to be the one thing about adolescence is that you're mesmerized with yourself.
I know, growing up tends to, you have to inherit you have to become insecure to grow up. I'm in that phase, I think. We all just pretend that we're secure, but maybe they're incredibly insecure because they do live in an incredibly chaotic political environment, but they're so used to projecting an image of themselves.
Well, yes. It's a hard. I mean, we're all flawed for starters. So let's get off just flawed. Now, does it mean we are hopeless? No. I think we've got some great. Look, example. You're a violinist. You're obviously a very good violinist. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the symphony. No, but that should be cherished. I think there's also humility in knowing what you're good at. There's a real humility in knowing what you're good at and also registering what you're not good at.
Definitely. I mean, I have to make a living as well. This is what I've trained to do. It's like being a doctor or an engineer. I've trained to do this. It's not just like some magical thing happened to me one day and I played the violin. I actually went to university to do this, and now I've got a job from doing it. I just sometimes feel like it's self-indulgent or it's imperialistic to play classical music, or all those things that the ultra left tell us. And I don't want to believe that. I want to believe that anyone who listens to the Symphony Orchestra can be transported away from their stressful lives, you know? So I'm hoping that what I do isn't representative of just imperialism somehow. I mean, surely
No,
it can
but
exist without...
have you had, I mean, that sort of conversation with people who think because they love classical music or they love listening to a fine piece of music. I would say for someone to say that has really not appreciated what is it to be really human and the fine qualities of being human. Because art, to appreciate good art and to appreciate good music and to appreciate what I call the aesthetics of life is a part of being human. The tragedy is when thousands and millions of people have been deprived the opportunity. And actually, it's one of the tensions that one of those 7 tensions. It's actually it's not just, it's sort of the need for competition, yes, but also a concern for the equality of opportunity.
Yeah. Can we talk about those 7 tensions?
Sure. They're from the group. Yeah.
I understand that. So
yeah.
can you just give a little background on what these 7 tensions are and where they've come from?
Well, it was before the millennium. You had all these educators in UNESCO that met and they decided what is the sort of pedagogy? What is it that we've got to be having as a way to teach people into the new millennium? Right? So that's so you had all these pedagogists from all sorts of different areas. And then they said, and I think it was led by Jacques Delors, who happened to be the chair, and he said, look, let's cast aside everything we know, just as a discipline, and just ask some fundamental questions about what is it that we need to address. And from this came up what is called the 7 tensions facing us as human beings. Right? And I'm trying to recall those 7 tensions.
Well, whichever ones come to your mind, people can look up what these 7 tensions are. I'm sure they'll find it on Google. But whichever ones spring to your mind, let's talk about them.
No, the first one is the tension between global and local. So, like I remember there was a time when I used to say you've got to think globally and act locally. I've changed that now. I think you've got to act locally and think globally. Because that's more realistic. Because the local is where you are now.
Yeah.
Right. So that one is a good one, I think, for people to have that as a part of their being. So they're local, but they're also thinking globally. The second one, which is closely aligned to that, is the sense of the universal and the individual. So what is it that we hold as human beings universally? And what is it that we have as an individual, which is legitimate? What I hold as an individual. So the tension between the two.
Beautiful. Yep.
Right? And and then, of course, that leads us to the very notion of, because all these things, they will have a notion of tradition versus modernity. And then we have the one which would be long-term to short-term consideration.
Yep. Beautiful.
With the tension we have to, and not only we do that as individuals, but we also do that as nations. We also do that as groups. And then, which I'd mentioned earlier, the need for competition, a healthy competition, and the concern for the equality of opportunity.
Yep.
And the 6th one, which is something that I'm facing, is the extraordinary expansion of knowledge and our capacity to retain it. And with me, the problem is a lot of this is to do with the modern technology, right? So, like, for example, someone like you would be far more knowledgeable in the sense, you have the skills of technology. Well, I don't. See, I learned to read and write on a slate, right? So then that's the 6th one. And the 7th one is something that needs a lot of discussion, which is and not just discussion, but also experiencing, is the tension between the spirit and the material. And how do we bring those things together? So those are the 7 tensions they identified, and they said to address it as a modus operandi, right from kindergarten, right through school, through secondary, and even into the universities, is the whole thing about learning to know. And then, so they call that the 4 pillars. And the second one was the learning to do. And the third one was learning to be. And the fourth one was learning to do this together. Which, yeah, so that's the...
Well remembered, Basil. Well remembered.
Oh, well, I was preparing my interview. That's why I said...
Oh, I'm interested in the final one of the 7. The spiritual and the material, because I know a lot of us have basically let go completely of the spiritual.
Right.
Gone. Nothing has replaced it. And there's a feeling of emptiness and just complete terror about everything that underlies that basic philosophy, which is there's nothing anywhere. Now, I don't need to have a religious discussion, but I do notice that the people with deep spiritual beliefs can seem to navigate the world emotionally a little better than someone who's totally abandoned it and feel a hopelessness in their lives.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, that's I think the gift that I've got, that I actually have a sense of the transcendence. But I have some wonderful friends who are atheists. And so as human beings, they're more like better human beings than myself. But they do tell me about the angst that they go through and their inability to accept that there is something beyond. Now, I don't think in the old days there used to be the whole apologetics discussion. I don't think that works anymore. I think what people need to do is to just step back and reflect and let, whether you do it through listening to good music or you do it through meditation or whether you do it through contemplation, is to let the transcendence speak to your heart. Because, I mean, the one thing that I like about the Indian philosophy is that when they say namaste, the namaste is actually, I acknowledge the spirit of God in you. And therefore I bow. So God for us is not up there, it's in here. And I think, because I come from, as you know, from there, I think from an Eastern rite, as Syrian Christians. So we have a different sense of like the crucifixion for us was never in isolation. It was always the crucified, risen Lord. So that helps in the consolation of dealing with the trials and pains of life. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I grew up Catholic, so I was always...
Oh, well, you are.
Yeah, I was always drawn to the Good Friday Mass, partly because I grew up with the drama and tragedy of classical music in general as well. So the Good Friday Mass for me was as tragic every year as it was every other year. And you're right, it's sort of taken out of context in that sense. If you forget the next phase, which is the rising...
Yes.
Then it's just a great story by itself and then nothing more than that. So
yeah, I can remember reading these incredible books on where suffering was almost an obsession, which is actually very unchristian in my book. One doesn't have to look for suffering. So, you suffering emerges in your life. But I can remember reading things like devotion to the left hand and the right hand, which is all very unhealthy, really. It's sort of that medieval unhealthy. So there is, but the good thing about, I'm influenced a great deal by the Jesuit thinking. The good thing about the Jesuits is that you've got to find God. in all things.
Mm.
So you've got to see what is, even philosophically speaking, I can remember, what is Marx actually telling us? And I remember seeing this extraordinary painting where you had Jesus with the hammer and sickle hurling it into the crowd. It was the artist, he's obviously, this artist was concerned about justice. And really, when you think about it, all these sort of revolutions took place because of the injustice in the world, and understandably. And I don't know whether you're familiar with liberation theology, which the South American theologians did, which they actually had they were accused of being heretics because they had almost a Marxian explanation about the material, but they didn't believe but they believed in the issue of God. So for example, you would have priests who would say to great landowners, I'm sorry, I can't give you communion if you haven't paid your, the people that work for you well, which was horror. Now, I don't know if I've been following the American and the Catholics in America, there's about 40% of them were Trumpites who have taken the gospel of prosperity, which is really the fundamentalist type of Christianity. So those are the issues. I can remember even when I was in South Australia in a town called Port Augusta, and it was my wife's, I think it was her nephew, and he's been baptized in this church. And I remember this church, and out there I could see this Aboriginal guy sitting down and staring into us. And I often wondered, how welcome was he there?
Yeah. Let's talk about those people for a minute. Let's talk about how Australians basically ignore the Indigenous issue. And how can we possibly ignore it? And yet we do.
Indeed. And I think there's a number of reasons for it, because I've been involved with it since the 60s. At least now, it has come into the mainstream discourse. And I think it's not that Australians, a lot of Australians that I knew, that said they'd never even met an Aboriginal.
Exactly.
So, and also they didn't know about the history of Australia. I mean, it all started with Cook for them, isn't it? So, and Aboriginal, yes, there were Aborigines, but they somehow disappeared, or they went on walkabout, or they just died. And then if people had some reflection, most of them sort of died or was sort of, just disappeared. Yeah. And then it's only people who are aware of the history now. It's a good thing. And then for them to face, this is actually what we have actually done to them. We don't have to say it's our personal guilt, see? It's not our personal guilt. It's something that a great nation says, yes, this is what's happened, and we hope to make something out of this. And that's what is called the reconciliation.
Melbourne Symphony Orchestra has they've taken on the responsibility of doing an acknowledgement before every concert. Yes. And the elders of the various lands have provided us with words in the language of the region so that members of the orchestra can make the acknowledgement in public. And I tell you, it's been really amazing. And it has been met with some resistance, not necessarily the acknowledgement, but that the acknowledgement is set to music. So some members of the orchestra don't like that it's a piece of music which doesn't match the program that we're about to play. But I spoke to a few members of the audience saying that it was a really beautiful, meditative, reflective moment just before the concert started, which brought everybody's focus in. And so it was an opportunity for people to settle down, and then they listened, and then they heard some Indigenous language, depending on where we are, and some music. And I've only had positive feedback from the audience. So it's really tiny little steps, and some people would say tokenism, but I don't believe it's tokenism. I believe it's just maybe it's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. So what do you make of that?
No, I think it's great. I mean, I know that a lot of people say, "Oh, you're having all this acknowledgement, but really, you know," and some have been cynically saying you have this acknowledgement, but in actual fact, you've taken all their lands, you're not acknowledging it. I, I, I personally think it's. See, going back to our earlier conversation, a lot of life is awareness, because a lot of people go through life not aware, and you know, you have that whole, what I call that type of naivety, which is lovely on one level because it's usually they're joyful souls, but but you also got to be aware of what has happened. I mean, I remember I used to go at one stage to the Pitjantjatjara country almost every year at a different part of my life when I was working, because they had a cohort coming down to Adelaide, and we used to go up to the Pitjantjatjara country. And I remember we used to go through Uluru, and I used to be, it was really overwhelming looking at that rock, because, you know, sort of dawned on me that for at least 60,000 years, human eyes were gazing on it. And I just found that an awesome thought. And I was just thinking that even if Aussies who love the bush, just for a moment thought that where they were walking and seeing that this area or that area had human eyes in contemplating it, I think something happens then.
I agree.
You have a different stance. You take a different stance about life. And I think in that sense, going back to your very specific question, that the awareness and acknowledgement, and done with music, I think it's fantastic. I've never heard it. I must come for one of these concerts to hear it.
I'll get you a ticket.
Oh, thank you. So are you saying that you have a piece of music that is composed for the acknowledgement?
Yes. So Deborah Cheetham has written that piece of music. And it's called Long Time Living Here. And sometimes the acknowledgement is sung if there's an opera singer that comes in, or a singer. Sometimes it's spoken by members of the orchestra. And so far we have 3 different languages. So if we're in Geelong, we do a different language from Hamer Hall, a different language from Town Hall. So, and I try and do it as often as possible. I love it. We get given the recordings of an Indigenous person speaking the words, so we know, so we can copy how to say it, and we have the English underneath the Indigenous language as well. So we know what we're saying, even though we don't exactly know which word means which word. But it's just such a privilege to be able to do it. It's just incredible. I love it.
Yeah, but excuse my ignorance. So you're saying you have the words, but where's the music coming from?
Oh, so the music starts, and then we have to time our delivery of the words to the music.
Oh, I got you. All right. So you have the music starts like an overture.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. It's more chilled out than an overture, but.
All right. Okay. You know those terms better than I would. And then you have an acknowledgement with words.
Yes. And the acknowledgement has been written by the elders of that particular region. So it's not, we haven't made up the words. They've made up the words. They've discussed what words should be said. So each, they're not the same sets of words in different languages. Right. They're different sets of words written by the region's elders and community.
Right. Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Lovely. I think it's wonderful. Yeah. And Deborah Cheetham sort of helped you with the words?
Yes, so she sent me a voice recording. I was panicking the first time I had to do it. I said, I don't know how to pronounce these words, even though it was written phonetically. I said, I don't know how to pronounce it. So I rang her and I said, can you please speak these words and send me a voice recording, because I don't want to not know how to pronounce these words. You know, we're musicians, so we copy sounds all the time. So she sent me the recording, and I listened to it 1,000 times so I could get exactly the right inflection and so on. Yeah. That's great. I mean, that's all I can do. You know, I can just try and push the attitudes a little bit in a different direction by standing up straight and saying, yes, we should do this, you know, because it's really important.
I think it's also discovering how you engage in life. I call it developing what I call an ease. You know, when you're 20, you sort of, I mean,
I totally understand what you're saying.
rage,
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Yep.
and then you begin to understand that your anger is although could be quite legitimate, but it's not going to get you anywhere because ultimately it burns you out.
And it polarizes people around you too.
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
I think that was I mean, I don't think I practiced, but that's what I think. I love why Gandhi was so fantastic, and even Martin Luther King, because they understood that, you know, and it takes enormous discipline to be able to fight in that way.
Yes, yeah. To have the ethics and the morals, but to not force them on people. Yeah, but that's an Indian concept as well. The acceptance of others.
Yeah, very much. I think in that way, which is a pity, because the present leader of India is a fascist, Modi. But you're right. One of the great things about Hinduism was that it accepted the paths to God were multitude. So I think the Indians understood diversity not only just as an intellectual concept, but they actually understood it experientially. Well, she is different, or he's different. He wears different. Yeah. You can be walking there. You have a naked sadhu walking down the street. And you go, that's it. I mean, it's yeah. So there was never a sense of, and there was a unity in that diversity, but there was never a uniformity.
Yeah.
Which is something very Greek. I think that's where the Western world took it from. You know, you only have two options in reality: what is and what is not.
Yes.
So there are no shades in between.
Yes.
You know, what is, and the other thing what is not, and there's shades in between. And that's what makes life richer, actually. You should know that you've been in a symphony. I mean, the fact that you have different instruments playing, and I think maybe that you could think about this engagement, that you could bring out the notion of the common good, because that's what the great music, the great symphony is.
That's beautiful.
In the context of music.
Yeah. Oh, that's gorgeous. Okay, I feel much better about myself and my contribution to the world now. What are you up to at the moment? What would you like people to know? You're involved. I mean, there's way too many things you've done in your life. I'm going to put a little bit of a blurb up about you, but what are you up to at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I'm doing some mentorship. I sort of do, advise people. Yeah.
Is this through an institution? Can we put a
website? No, it's mainly people whom I know say go and have a conversation with Basil, and you might find that useful. So that's one aspect, and the other one I'm also interested in what is now called the consciousness aging. What does that mean? And the other thing which I mentioned earlier is also I'd like to see how the cooperative movement will go. Because it's actually quite exciting, because the place in Spain is the one that has done a lot of work in that area.
Oh, yeah. What's that? Tell us about that, the cooperative movement.
The cooperative movement is basically that there's nothing, it's very ancient and very new. The fact is that anything that we do to make a better world is we do it with others. We just don't do it just all by ourselves. So that's putting it very simply. But there's a lot of literature which I could send you on the cooperative movement. But beautiful. Simply, it's a simple thing is that if we are going to work on something, then we need to do it collaboratively. And the collaborative is the emphasis. And it can be sustainable. And often
That's just really wonderful. Yeah. So I'd like to
also
recommend that.
Basil's Table, incidentally.
Basil's Table?
Yes, which is where I'm interviewed, like what you're doing, and I'll be interviewing someone who's done some social good.
Do you do this as well?
Well, I don't do it. It's actually it's the group, the 888, because I'm hopeless when it comes to the technology. They sort of say, look, Basil, we just want you here at such and such a time, and then while during COVID we had it Zoom like we're doing it now.
Yeah.
The next one in June is going to be at the Kelvin Club, where my
Oh,
first two took place. Yeah. I'll let you know about that if you're
fantastic.
interested. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, please. Oh, look, I'd really like to thank you for talking to me. I know we could talk on and on and on about all of these topics. And thank you for keeping our spirits up and inspiring us. I really want to thank you for that.
Well, no, thank you. And just remember that the more people, it's also discerning. It's not the fact that we have got to agree with one another.
Yes, exactly.
It's a question of saying that we actually belong to the human race and we have a lot of common good things to do. We are faced with the challenges now, huge, enormous challenges. And I reckon if we have to quote the lovely line from Manfred, if we have the spittle for it, we can clamor like champions.
Oh.
Because we need that. And that's what I'm saying. Once we get that paradigm that I've been sharing with you as a way of approaching, then I think we can do it. Maybe the end result, someone like me, I won't see because just statistically, I will fall off the perch.
I'll stop
But
it.
no. I don't share that with any. Because I'm reminded of Charlie Brown's cartoon. Remember that?
Yeah.
They're both, he and Snoopy are the wolf. You seen that one? And they're looking out of the sea, and Charlie Brown says, you die once. And Snoopy says, no, you're wrong. We live every day.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Great chatting with you, Basil. Take
Same
care.
here.
I really appreciate it.
Well,
Okay.
thank you. All right. You take care. All right. Bye.
Bye.